you have to compete globally. And what you really need to do is justify for people that could fly to Norway or fly to London and get 20 or 30% why they should invest in Africa. Because it's no longer a nationalistic thing or a, I like the place, I'm going to help someone, right? It's if we can deliver exciting returns, and by definition, that process will create jobs. And by definition, that process will attract smart people who grew up in Africa to come back because then there are exciting things for them to do. Then that process feeds on itself. That's what happened in China. People saw exciting returns. Everyone beat the path down to China. That's what happened in Brazil. That's what's happening in Indonesia. If you fly into Indonesia, for those that have been, Indonesia, actually, when you first get into you land at the airport, it looks worse than a lot of African airports. But the number of people that are on those flights looking for investment opportunities is just astounding, right? Literally, it's just a bunch of investors going in there. So hopefully this is now starting to happen here. So I'll stop and maybe take some questions.
Over 5 minutes for questions. Yep.
How widespread is internet access for the average African, and what trends do you see there?
It depends a lot on where you are. I think it's still too low in general, period. Some countries are much better than others. So if you go to Rwanda, for instance, what's happened in Rwanda is insane, literally, from the perspective of internet access. And that's for one simple reason, which is that the president has said, I want my country to be wired by this year, and has assigned people to it and operates like a CEO. He has directors and he says, where are we on this thing, where are we on that thing? So, on the other hand, if you go to places like, let's say, Uganda, that has been in the internet business for a long time, you still have internet coverage at probably 25%. And there's places that are 2%, right? So it's still clearly lower than it needs to be, although I think it's changing. The thing that's more exciting about that, though, is I think that's going to be leapfrogged by cell phone technology, right? That's really the key, right? Because for most people, you can't have a conversation with someone that's in the village about getting online, right? It's an irrelevant conversation, right? They're going to make sure they can eat, send their kids to school. But you can talk to them about the cell phone. And you can talk to them about moving money or receiving money from their kids who went abroad on the cell phone. And I think that's really going to catalyze the process of getting internet access to Africa. Yes.
Hold on, please. Oh, she's quicker than me.
You've been beaten.
To get me the mic. In terms of social responsibility, these returns are astonishingly high. Two questions I have for you. One, is the money getting to the people? Is it being spread out, or is it just being concentrated in a few people? And secondly, is this being done in a environmentally reasonably sensitive way?
So two very good questions. I think the way to think about is, first of all, the way to put these returns into context is that if you generated these returns in Europe, you would have to use leverage. You'd have to borrow a ton of money. In Africa, you basically can't borrow money. It'll take 6 months to get anything from a bank, and by then the deal is gone, right? So a huge reason why this is happening is because you've got a natural tailwind in a lot of sectors. You've got sectors that are growing at 50% a year, right? So I'll give you a real example. So everyone knows, well, not everyone, but let's say a lot of people know MTN telecoms companies. MTN comes to Uganda in, I think it was 2000, maybe 99 or 2000. Their budget, their expected business plan says, we hope we can get 500,000 people on the cell phone in 3 years. They fund to that budget. They staff for that budget. In 6 months, they have 3 million. The system's crashing, right? Now, you're going to get this type of return if you invest in MTN. Right? You just sit outside and watch all the people who are scratching cards and making phone calls. So now that will go away, right? And so part of the reason this is interesting is obviously the first movers get to capture this. Now, to your question though, I think the way that I think about is the money getting to people is not so much who owns the fund. That is a lot less relevant because a lot of these funds are not very big funds. I think the real value add from a social perspective to that question is what are those funds doing, what are they investing in, and how does that affect people? So anyone that introduces, cell phones to any place in Africa has affected many more people than they would by literally distributing those profits out to those people. Anyone that's investing in agriculture, we went out to see some farms in southern Africa who have literally like hundreds of people either farming or packing, and there's an ecosystem built around that. There are schools built there because that's the way you get the community invested. Huge. I mean, any of those people would kill if anyone would kill you if you came into Tampa with their farm, right? So to me, that's the way really to think about, is the money getting back to people from a social perspective. Now, as to how the environment is getting affected, I think it just varies dramatically. I mean, I'm sure there's people that are doing that in an environmentally insensitive way, although what's happening now is that a lot of development finance institutions, which typically are the first investors in these funds, have set very clear environmental and social governance constraints. And so that's starting to have an effect where people that make investments are thinking about the environmental and social issues and building that into what they're doing. You see more and more funds now where a piece of the general partner, a piece of the ownership of the fund is basically a non-profit that takes profits from the fund to invest in the areas that the fund is investing in, the community and so on and so forth. And so I think that trend is encouraging, but clearly more needs to be done there.